For 25 years, I thought I had a rock-solid marriage. But when my wife started changing after our kids left for college, I brushed it off as empty nest syndrome. Then, a shocking revelation from my daughter turned my world upside down. This is a story about betrayal, family, and the difficult path to finding peace. I thought I had it all figured out. My wife and I had been together for 25 years, high school sweethearts who defied the odds. In a world where marriages fell apart left and right, I believed ours would be the exception. We'd been through everything together, raising two incredible kids, a daughter and a son. I truly believed that our marriage was solid, built to withstand any test that life threw at us. It was naive of me, I see that now. My wife had been a stay-at-home mom for most of our lives together, a choice we made when our kids were young. But once they left for college, she grew restless, struggling with the emptiness of the house. She told me she felt unfulfilled, as if she'd lost sight of who she was. She wanted something more, something that made her feel alive again. I understood. It wasn't easy for her to adjust to the quiet, the routine, the feeling of having no direction. So I supported her. I suggested hobbies, trips, new things we could do together. For a while, it seemed to help. But then she wanted more. She told me she needed to feel like she was contributing to the world. She wanted to work again, and I agreed. It made sense. One of her friends helped her land a position at a real estate firm, reviving the career she'd left behind when our kids were born. She was excited, and honestly, so was I. I thought this was what she needed. And at first, it was. The job energized her, she was happy and focused. Life was falling into a rhythm again. Then, slowly, things began to shift. It didn't happen overnight, but once I noticed, the changes felt impossible to ignore. At first, I thought they were simply side effects of her newfound independence. She was reconnecting with an old part of herself, someone she hadn't been in years. She'd start going out with her coworkers for drinks after hours, something she'd never done before. Then she'd be glued to her phone, laughing at late-night texts, brushing it off as work stuff when I'd ask. I told myself it was harmless, that she deserved some freedom after years of taking care of our family. But then, there were the clothes. She'd always dressed casually, especially around me. But now, she began wearing clothes that showed off her figure more than I'd ever seen her do. She started wearing perfume, a particular scent she'd never liked before but suddenly seemed to adore. At first, I liked the change. She was confident, and she looked great. It wasn't until one night that I felt the first prick of doubt. I'd glanced over at her phone when it buzzed and accidentally saw a text, a message from a male coworker that went way beyond friendly. The tone, the flirting, it all felt wrong. When I confronted her, she brushed it off, saying he was just a friend and promised to set boundaries with him. I wanted to believe her. I didn't want to be that paranoid husband, hovering over her shoulder. So, I let it go, convincing myself that everything was fine. But as time went on, her behavior kept shifting, pulling us further apart. She started talking about living life spontaneously, even picking up some of the habits she used to mock, like smoking weed. She'd stay out late, come home smelling of booze, and sometimes make comments that stung. Once, in a drunken haze, she even hinted that maybe I'd dimmed her light or held her back. Those words hit hard. I thought I'd done my best to support her, but suddenly, it felt like I was the villain in her story. I didn't know what to do. So I tried harder, making every effort to win her back, to be a better husband. I even booked us marriage counseling, hoping that something would help us reconnect. But it seemed like she was one step ahead, always a little further out of reach, disappearing behind this new life she'd created for herself. Then, without warning, the behavior stopped. She apologized, saying she'd lost herself, but realized she wanted to stay and work on our marriage. She quit her job and agreed to counseling, and for the first time in a long time, things started to feel right again. It was a painful few months, but somehow we emerged closer. Or so I thought. We were more intimate, she was attentive, and life settled back into a comfortable rhythm. Yet, something kept gnawing at me, a tiny, nagging feeling that I tried to ignore. And strangely, during this time, her relationship with our daughter soured. They grew distant, strained, though she'd insist it was just a woman thing. I wanted to trust her, so I didn't press. Looking back, I see how many signs I ignored, but then, I just wanted to believe. Just when life seemed to be settling, tragedy struck, bringing everything to a halt. One evening, my wife was on her way back from grocery shopping when a drunk driver hit her car. The accident was severe. She survived, but the doctors told us she'd never walk again. She was bound to a wheelchair, and the carefree, adventurous side she'd rediscovered was gone in an instant. Her whole world collapsed, and I felt a deep, aching pain for her. Despite everything that had happened, I wanted to be there for her, to help her find peace in this new reality. But things only got worse. As she sank into depression, she started saying things that unsettled me. She'd casually suggest that I should sleep with other women, almost as if she wanted me to leave. I'd brush it off, reminding her I'd married her for better or worse, that I wasn't going anywhere. The hurt in her eyes whenever I reassured her was almost haunting, like she couldn't believe I was willing to stay. It was confusing. I couldn't understand why she seemed so uncomfortable with my loyalty, my desire to help her. One afternoon, she asked me a question that stopped me cold. "Why are you so good to me? I don't deserve it." I tried to comfort her, telling her that we'd get through this together, that I loved her. She broke down crying, apologizing without giving any reason. I chalked it up to her depression and let it go, hoping things would improve with time. A few months later, during a routine checkup, the doctors found a mass in her throat. They warned it could be cancer, urging her to get a biopsy. I was shocked, terrified, but she reacted in a way that left me speechless. She laughed. It started as a quiet chuckle, then grew into hysterical laughter, muttering through tears, "I deserve this. This is my punishment." Her behavior alarmed me, but she asked for one thing before the biopsy: a family dinner. She wanted our kids there, along with close family. I didn't question it, hoping it would help lift her spirits. That night, I made a heartfelt speech about our family, about how she'd been my rock and my light. As I spoke, I noticed our daughter shifting uncomfortably, almost as if my words were making her physically uneasy. I assumed it was just the emotional strain of her mother's health issues. Little did I know, that look on my daughter's face wasn't because of fear or sadness. It was something far more devastating, a truth that was about to shatter everything. The night after the family dinner, my phone rang unexpectedly. It was my daughter, and I could tell immediately that something was wrong. Her voice trembled as she mumbled incoherently, clearly drunk. "Dad, please, don't hate me," she slurred, her words choked with emotion. Confused, I tried to reassure her, telling her that I would always love her, no matter what. My words seemed to open a floodgate. Through broken sobs, she finally told me the truth, the reason her relationship with her mother had grown strained, the reason she had seemed so uncomfortable during my speech. Years ago, during my wife's time at the real estate firm, our daughter had seen her mother with another man. She'd been on a road trip with friends, passing through a small diner when she spotted them, her mother and a man, completely absorbed in each other, locked in an intimate kiss. He was someone my daughter had never seen before, and he looked nothing like me. The pieces started falling into place, the memories of my wife's distant behavior, the late nights, the spontaneous habits that had suddenly appeared. My daughter explained that she hadn't known what to do, so she confronted her mother privately, demanding answers. According to her, my wife broke down, begging her not to tell me. She admitted that the man was a coworker, the one behind the flirtatious messages I'd once seen. She claimed it had been a brief, regrettable affair, and that getting caught by our daughter had been her wake-up call. She said it was the biggest mistake of her life, something she intended to take to the grave. The pain and betrayal hit me all at once. I felt sick, my mind reeling as I tried to process what my daughter was telling me. She explained that this discovery had put her in an impossible position, forced to carry the weight of her mother's secret. It was why she had grown closer to me, why she distanced herself from her mother. I'd been living in a bubble, thinking our family was strong, that we'd survived the rough patches. In reality, the foundation of my marriage had crumbled years ago, and I'd been the last to know. When I confronted my wife, she didn't deny it. Through her tears, she admitted everything, her voice cracking as she apologized. She explained how it had started, how her coworkers' persistence eventually wore her down. She'd been swept up in the excitement, she said, seeking something new after years of feeling stagnant. But seeing the pain in our daughter's eyes had jolted her back to reality. That's when she realized what she stood to lose. She claimed she hadn't wanted to hurt me, that she was too much of a coward to confess and had hoped to atone quietly, to repair our marriage without me ever knowing. But her efforts, her guilt, none of it could erase the damage that had already been done. Hearing her admit to it was like the final blow, crushing what little faith I'd still held on to. I was left devastated, staring at the woman I thought I knew, realizing that the life we'd built was little more than a fragile illusion. After my wife's confession, something in me changed. I went through the motions of our life together, but the connection between us was gone. Every interaction felt hollow, a reminder of the lie I'd unknowingly lived. I continued to care for her physically, helping her with her wheelchair, making her meals, but it was like tending to a stranger. Any warmth I'd once felt was replaced by a deep, numbing resentment. She seemed to sense the shift, growing desperate to make things right. She'd beg me to talk to her, to share my feelings, to forgive her. But every time I looked at her, all I could see was her betrayal and the hurt she'd caused our daughter. It wasn't just about the affair, it was about the years she'd hidden it, the years I'd been kept in the dark while she pretended we were rebuilding something real. One afternoon, she grabbed my hand as I was serving her lunch, pleading for me to say something, anything. The frustration that had been building in me finally erupted. I told her everything I'd been holding back, the anger, the disgust, the sense of betrayal that hung between us like a dark cloud. I confessed that she'd gone from being my world to a burden I had to carry. Every time I heard her voice, every touch, every interaction felt like a weight around my neck, dragging me down. I told her that I still thought about her constantly, that some part of me still loved her, but every time I tried to hold her, the memory of her with another man would flash through my mind. And worst of all, I told her, was what she'd done to our daughter, forcing her to carry the burden of her mother's guilt and lies. Through my words, she just sat there, silent, tears streaming down her face. When I was done, she whispered, "I deserve this." She admitted she felt like a murderer for what she'd done to our family and promised she'd do anything to help me heal. She even said that if I chose to leave, she wouldn't hold it against me, that she'd never regret the life we'd had, despite the pain she'd caused. Her words left me feeling hollow. I could see the guilt eating her alive, but it was hard to reconcile the woman before me with the person who had betrayed me so thoroughly. I wondered if she was sincere or if this was just another way for her to ease her own conscience. But no matter what I felt, I knew one thing: nothing could undo the damage, and forgiveness felt like an impossible task. I found myself torn between the love I once had for her and the bitterness of her betrayal, stuck in a place where anger and heartbreak intertwined. After that conversation, I realized I couldn't carry this weight alone anymore. The anger, the hurt, the confusion, it was all too much, swirling together in a mess of emotions I couldn't sort through on my own. I decided to book therapy, not just for myself, but also for us as a couple. I didn't know if there was any hope for our marriage, but I needed a controlled environment to say the things that had been building inside me without fear of exploding again. In our first session, the therapist encouraged us to be honest, to open up about the past and how we saw our future. My wife confessed her overwhelming guilt, the shame that gnawed at her daily. She told me how hard it was to look in the mirror, to see the person she'd become, someone she never wanted to be. Through tears, she promised that her love for me had always been real, that the affair had been a brief, foolish escape she deeply regretted. Hearing her remorse in that setting was painful, but it helped soften some of my anger, even if only slightly. I was honest too, admitting that I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive her or move on. I talked about the toll her betrayal had taken on me, how it had shattered my trust and left me feeling unworthy. I told her that every day, I felt like I was in a battle between the love I once had for her and the resentment I felt now. I also admitted that I thought about leaving but felt guilty at the thought of abandoning her in her condition. The therapist encouraged me to focus on my own healing before making any life-changing decisions, which felt both liberating and daunting. As our sessions continued, I realized there was something else I needed to confront: the man who'd been part of my wife's affair. For my own peace of mind, I needed to know who he was, what had happened between them, and why he thought it was acceptable to intrude on our marriage. I told my wife I wanted his contact information. She looked at me, startled, but eventually nodded, understanding that this was part of my journey toward closure. Outside of therapy, life carried on as best as it could. My wife was fragile, always watching me for signs of forgiveness, and our kids tried to keep the peace, sensing the tension in the air. I could see the toll this was taking on our daughter, who had already suffered enough because of her mother's actions. I promised myself I would shield her from any more pain, no matter what happened between her mother and me. The path ahead was unclear, but therapy gave me a glimmer of hope that I could eventually find clarity. Whether it would lead to forgiveness, acceptance, or simply a parting of ways, I didn't know. But I was beginning to accept that, for now, not having all the answers was okay. As the weeks passed, therapy became a lifeline. Each session helped me unpack my feelings, slowly working through the heartbreak and confusion. My wife continued to apologize, to seek redemption in small gestures, but I began to realize that forgiveness was a gift I might never be able to give. Maybe that was okay. Some wounds cut too deep to fully heal, and I was learning to accept that my journey might not lead to a perfect resolution. Eventually, I followed through on my desire to meet the man who'd been a part of her betrayal. It wasn't about revenge, it was about understanding. I arranged to meet him in a public place, choosing a quiet coffee shop where we could talk calmly. He was remorseful, more than I expected, and admitted that he'd known she was married but had selfishly pursued the affair anyway. There was no satisfaction in his apologies, no closure that eased my pain. But somehow, the confrontation did help. I felt a weight lift, as if by confronting the person who had contributed to the rupture of my marriage, I'd regained some of my own power. At home, I continued to take care of my wife, but it was more out of a sense of duty than affection. I was committed to supporting her through her health struggles, and while I didn't know what the future held for us, I knew that, for now, I needed to be there. I leaned on my family, my friends, and found comfort in the simplicity of spending time with my daughter, knowing she too was healing from the scars left by her mother's actions. One day, during a quiet moment at home, I looked at my wife and felt something shift. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a softening of the bitterness I'd held onto so tightly. I realized that maybe, one day, I could find peace without needing to forget or forgive entirely. I could still honor the years we'd spent together, the family we'd built, even if our marriage could never go back to what it was. For now, I'm taking things one day at a time, focusing on myself, my daughter, and whatever future might lie ahead. I don't have all the answers, and I might never find the perfect resolution. But I've come to accept that healing doesn't mean erasing the past. It means learning to live alongside it, finding hope in the scars it leaves behind.